Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, an IFS-informed trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from guests all around the world as they share their impactful stories and deliver hope and inspiration through their personal post-traumatic growth. We explore and discuss resources and coping strategies to support the survivor community to thrive in their own healing journeys. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I have with me today Amy Pagett. Amy is an accredited trauma-informed coach and alumni of Moving the Human Spirit, MTHS. She's a certified breathwork coach through Yoga Body and trained in Somatic Embodiment with Linda Tai. In addition, she's a certified self-sabotage coach. She's an elementary school teacher as well as a coach. Her background in education, as well as her Bachelor's of Science honors degree in psychology, blend well with her ability to teach, foster, and cultivate new learning in trauma recovery. Amy understands trauma through a personal perspective, as she too is a trauma survivor. She witnessed her brother die tragically at a young age and learned to embody a new role in the world of her grieving family. She became the people pleaser and adopted the fawning trauma response pattern. She is also a childhood sexual abuse survivor and understands how shame and guilt follow abuse survivors into adulthood. For several years, Amy battled an autoimmune disease that left her unable to work or do many daily activities. She understands how the body remembers trauma even when the mind tries to forget. She was covered in oozing blisters on her hands, feet, and lips, three parts of the body that Amy believes hold significant importance. Fittingly, as a teacher, Amy says she literally learned her way through recovery. She deepened her education and embraced every opportunity to learn about healing and post traumatic growth. Her belief is that healing is not a final destination, but rather a journey that keeps getting better. I love that. She understands the importance of having a safe space to share and offers compassion and safety to her clients. She works with women who are trying to navigate their childhood traumas that are locked within their bodies, and her approach to healing incorporates the mind, body, and spirit. AIM True Coaching is rooted in science, spirituality, and creativity to build personal goals for each client. Amy, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate this. Your story, oh gosh, so much trauma, so many different forms spanning over many, many years. And here you are thriving now as a multiple coach of so many different modalities. Um, you're helping others. You're bringing people with you on the journey. So just share a little bit more about your journey. How did you land here?
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I think for me, I was someone who really ignored the fact that I had trauma. I pretended that it didn't happen. And like most survival skills, that worked for a really long time. And it worked until it didn't. And then, I ended up with these blisters all over me, all over the soles of my feet and the palms of my hands and my lips. And I really couldn't do the things I used to be able to do anymore, and I couldn't keep up with that busyness. And so for me, I feel like it was my body screaming at me to say, okay, you really need to stop and, acknowledge the wounds that you have within you. And so that's really what I had to do. But it was a difficult journey because I had to not only heal physically, but, emotionally as well. And there were so many layers to it, right? Because I had hit it for so long. And so then all of a sudden it was there, really prominent, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Yeah. And so, the death of my brother was really tragic, and I was so young, and children internalize things so differently. For me, I really internalized that, it was my fault and I was responsible for the happiness of my parents. They were grieving this unimaginable loss. And I didn't really understand what had happened other than, my brother was gone and my parents were not the same anymore. And so I became this people pleaser and felt that it was my responsibility to, look after them. And in a way, there was a lot of abandonment as well, right? Because my parents weren't the same anymore, and also I really don't hold any ill will towards my parents. They were doing the best that they could at the time. It was an awful situation. Um, But because of that, because of what I internalized, then when I was sexually abused, I did not tell my parents. I felt that it was too much for them. And so I tried to bear that alone. And the way I did that was just not talk about it, right? Just not talk about it, just keep going, just push through. And I embodied that my whole life. Yeah, and I really took on, the day that my brother died, it was very chaotic. There was a sense of urgency and fear. And those are things that I also embodied going through life. And so then when I got sick, it was like, whoa, all of this is coming to the surface, and I need to find a way to deal with it. Yeah.
And
And at the same
literally
time,
for you,
pardon?
literally as it's because it's actually coming to the surface of your hands and your feet and your lips. It wasn't, like an internal, a digestion issue, migraines. It literally was coming to the surface.
Yeah, it was, and it was so debilitating, right? Because I couldn't do the things that I used to be able to do.
Right.
And I was really good at pretending really that I had it all together because I had really pretended my whole life,
Mm.
and so all of a sudden I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep going. And so that was really, really hard for me to acknowledge that, okay, now I have to acknowledge these wounds, but now I also have to acknowledge that I can't do things. I need people to help me. So that was hard. And then, to navigate the disability system as well, right? Because it's really set up to cross-examine your truth and question, your reality. And as a trauma survivor, that's really awful to feel that rejection. And so I did do it, and I had a lot of help and a lot of people support me. Um, but when I first started to heal, I honestly wanted someone to just say, okay, here's the checklist. Here's what you need to do. Just get it done. And then we can move on and I can just, go on with my life.
Isn't that so unfair when no one gives you that checklist? It's so
I know. And I was like,
annoying.
where is it?
Because you can do things really well, right? So if someone gave you like, a map, which we don't have for trauma recovery, right? I often call that, my listeners know, a maze. That's the word that I use, right? You're going to hit some dead ends and, find some rock bottoms and get turned around and you're so dizzy inside of there, but there's still a lot of joy in the recovery process itself. But yeah, no, definitely not no map for the course.
Yeah, definitely. And I
Unfortunately.
really wanted one.
So you created your own. It sounds like you kind of did, right? Jumping into, embodiment for yourself. I know Linda Ty's course. It's on my to-do list for 2023 for sure. I've heard nothing but amazing things about that and somatic experiencing and those kind of things. Tell us a little bit more about what somatic embodiment means and how it's really helpful for survivors.
Mm. So somatic embodiment really is, befriending your nervous system and understanding what it means for you because everybody's different, right? And so understanding what it means for you to be in the different states of your nervous system. Like what does it look like when you're in dorsal? What does it look like when you're in ventral? Parasympathetic, sympathetic. What does that look and feel like for you? And so when you know what it feels like, then you can understand it better. And then there's the more conscious awareness of, you know what, I'm triggered right now. And my body is responding this way because I'm triggered. And so really when you befriend your nervous system, then you are able to move forward because you understand it better.
Yeah. What does that moving forward look like? So once you recognize I'm triggered, this is what's happening in my nervous system. How are you able to use that information and data collect it, but actually you have to do something with it, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So with a lot of my clients, I do story states. So, what is your nervous system story state? What's the story telling you right now? And what does that look like for you? And then when you're in that state, how can you self-regulate and how can you co-regulate? So many trauma survivors have spent their life co-regulating with the people in their lives, right? That's what I did as a child. I co-regulated with my parents. I took my cues from them, and they were really dysregulated. And so then my system wasn't regulated. And so it's about finding healthy ways to self regulate and co regulate with people. So, when you're feeling dysregulated, what are some ways that you can regulate yourself on your own, but as well as with other people, or even with pets? Like a lot of people use their pets to co-regulate. I know that we have a dog, and when I put the dog on my lap, it's a little lap dog, and I just cuddle with him, I can feel my nervous system calming. So really knowing what works for you, because everybody's nervous system is different. Someone else may not like an animal on their lap. That might not feel calming for them.
Right. Right. I learned that so powerfully with the breath work piece, right? And I know that you're a breath work coach and trained in that. And I did learn, and I was really surprised to hear that there's certain survivors. It generally seems to be like violent abuse, where maybe there was strangulation or drowning or something tragic like that happening. That breath work can be really triggering for some
Mhm.
survivors, where for so many others, like using your breath to calm you or to activate you. If you're in like a hypoarousal, you can kind of activate a little bit with it. But I learned that and I was like, oh, yeah, there is literally a different regimen for different people and their different types of trauma and how their body kind of stored it. I love this idea though of like co-regulating, and you're right, when you're in your trauma, most trauma, I mean, yes, there's some acute, car accidents, acts of God, that kind of thing, but a lot of trauma that really infuses into the body is going to come from some type of relational trauma. And so when you were co-regulating with your parents, that's where you would have gotten into that like fawning response. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what the fawning response is and what that people pleasing, how that manifested itself in your life and how you were able to kind of move away from that?
Yeah. So the fawning response really is that, you become a people pleaser, and I really put the needs of others first. And so much so that I really lost track of what my own needs were. They really became entangled with everybody else's. And so when someone would say, well, what do you want? I don't know. I really didn't know, because I took my cues from everybody else, right? And put everybody else's needs first. And as a child, that's what I did with my parents. I put their needs first. And so mine took a back burner. And then I embodied that my whole life. And, with people pleasing comes that guilt and shame that, oh, I really have to do everything for everybody else first, and my needs don't matter. And I'm not really clear on what my needs are. And so for me, it was getting really clear about, what do I need? And that is a hard thing to do when someone says, well, what do you need? I don't know. Right? Because a lot of times you don't know. So it's not necessarily an answer that can come right away. It takes a lot of reflecting
Yeah.
and a lot of really thinking, okay, what do I need? And listening to my body, and what does my body need? What is my body telling me right now? And being able to identify where in my body I feel things.
Right. That self-abandonment, that's exactly what you're talking about. And I know there might be some people listening or watching who are like, come on, if someone says, what do you need right now? You're going to know what you need. Literally, if you have abandoned your inner self, your body, your emotions, your feelings, and your own personal thoughts, the reality is you don't know. That is not a lie when someone really isn't that disconnected, their mind from their body. I also love you call yourself a self-sabotage coach. And this is going to be a whole nother level here, right? So self-abandonment kind of being that people-pleasing, fawning response. But tell us more about this self-sabotage. What does this mean? And how do you work with clients who are struggling with this?
hmm So self-sabotage essentially is you getting in your own way, right?
Yeah.
And so as trauma survivors, we do that. We adopt that a lot. And oftentimes it's adopted in service of survival, right? So it's really important that if you are self-sabotaging, that there's no judgment there, because the self-sabotage did what it was supposed to do. It allowed you to survive, right? But and I self-sabotaged for a long time, and it got me through life, and it allowed me to be successful in many areas of my life. So I can't look back on that and say it was awful. But self-sabotage shows up in many forms. The most common that we think of is like, alcoholism and drug addiction, but there's also things like perfectionism, procrastination, compulsive shopping, or eating, so there's a lot of different forms of self-sabotage. And really it is you getting in your own way. And it's because you really don't know what your needs are. So it goes back to that. I don't know what my needs are. I'm not really sure how to move forward. And so I'm just going to stay stuck. Really, that's what self-sabotage does. It keeps you stuck. And so it's really acknowledging, okay, what am I doing right now? Is this serving my highest and best good? And then really diving into that and saying, okay, who are the people that are involved in my self-sabotage? What's the environment that's involved in my self-sabotage? What are my beliefs around this self-sabotage? Like, what am I telling myself? What am I doing? How am I justifying this behavior? Because we are really good at justifying our behaviors.
Right. Wow. The marriage of self-abandonment and self-sabotage is really, first of all, it's always important to recognize, in IFS parts language here, right, that all your parts are good. And I love the way that you said self-sabotage is going to its purpose and its intention is in service to the need of survival. I loved the way that you said that because that's so important to remember. But it's almost like you're trying to attain something that is not attainable, right? So people pleasing would be another form of that. Like you're going out self-sacrificing to people please, which is it's impossible to please people. If people are unhappy, it's because they're unhappy from within themselves, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
So we're setting this like, loft perfectionism, those kinds of things. Like, yeah, you're set up for failure in that sense, right? So self-sabotage leads to a lot of, frustration and probably self-worth issues, I would think, right? Can you speak a little bit more on like what I'm just imagining, like the devaluation when you're not able to hit these lofty goals because you're self-sabotaged? What does that feel like and look like for someone who's been doing that for years and years and years?
Well, first of all, self-sabotage is a cycle, right? It's a cycle that is really familiar. And as humans, we are drawn to what feels familiar. Even if it's unhealthy, it's familiar and it feels comforting,
Right.
right? And so we will continue doing things that are unhealthy, and we'll continue doing them until there's some awareness piece, right? There has to be some awareness that, you know what, this is keeping me stuck. But of course, there is that feeling of unworthiness, right? And I felt that for a really long time. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. And so it's really looking at, okay, what am I doing to feed my worthiness? What am I doing to move forward? And it's a big part of healing is looking at what you are doing. We have to face some truths within ourselves. What happened to us was not our fault, but healing is our responsibility. And so it's really looking at, what are we doing to serve our highest and best good? Are we doing everything that we can? Is this serving my highest and best good? And really looking at how this self-sabotage is affecting your life. What is it doing to your relationships? What is it doing to you as a person? So it's really diving deep into the things that you are doing. And it's difficult, right? It's really hard to face those ugly truths about ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Looking in that mirror and saying, this is now once you see it, it becomes your responsibility. And there's a lot of us that run from looking at it for so long because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you know it, then now it's your responsibility. Beforehand, it wasn't, right? Like, and there is, we want to be sensitive to, the victimization of human beings, right? If you don't know, you don't know, right? But once you do, you not only have a responsibility, but an opportunity, to do something about that. I'm hearing like, um, you say almost like there's like a counterbalance, right? So focusing on your self-worth, especially when something has been detracting from your value and your worth for so long. So not just not doing the thing that keeps not serving you, but finding something to supplant that actually does serve you so that you can build that integrity and build that self-esteem back up. Does that land? Is that am I hearing that right?
Yeah, and it's all about repetition, right? Like when you say, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore, it doesn't really work that way, right?
Right.
It has to be slow and gradual, right? So it's about slowly, okay, you know what? This choice isn't working for me. It's keeping me stuck. It's feeding those feelings of worthlessness. So I need to slowly and gradually, and of course with compassion and empathy, change what I'm doing. Right. And so it happens through repetition. So as you slowly repeat things, and for me, there's a lot of self-talk. I created these posters and I put them up along the wall. So as soon as I got up in the morning, they were there. And it was like, Amy, you are good enough. Amy, you are amazing. Amy, you can, do anything that you set your mind to. So it was just, I would see it first thing in the morning. Oh, okay. I'm going to start my day well.
I've already spoken so much about so many different types of resources here for trauma survivors, just understanding what happened to your brain, understanding your trauma response, right? One of my episodes was about the different 4 F's. And then I'm a slew of F people. Like I think there's like 20 different F's, right? Fixing and functioning, flowing, like befriending, those kinds of things. So, but the 4F response is important, and understanding and recognizing abandonment and self-sabotage is huge. When you were moving through your healing journey, give us an idea of a couple, two, three, however many you'd like, of resources that were helpful that really were catalysts in your healing.
Mm-hmm. I would say I really did literally learn my way through healing. I took every course imaginable, and and I feel like every course I took offered me something to move forward. The two that I would say that were the most beneficial would be, Linda Tye's Somatic Embodiment course, because I had spent my whole life ignoring my body. I didn't even I didn't really understand what it meant for me to be in different states, right? So it was like this huge awareness piece, like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what's happening in my body when I'm feeling shame. I can identify that it's in my throat and my chest, and that I can feel the tightening, whereas before I just ignored it.
Right.
Right. So that one would be huge. And the breathwork one was amazing too. When I was seeing a therapist, she tried to do breathwork with me, and it was belly breathing. And she said, well, you're not doing it right. And I was so defensive, because I was like, what do you mean I'm not doing it right? Everybody knows how to breathe. But, when I took the breathwork course, I realized that there is a science behind breathwork, and there is different types of breathwork. So, you can do breath work to stimulate different parts of your nervous system, and the speed and pace of your breath work is going to change, the regulation of your nervous system. And so those things were huge for me, right? Because then I had tools that I really understood, because I think a lot of people just say, oh, breathe in and out, and they don't really understand how to do it properly. And so it was like, I really understood how to do it properly, and I understood how it related to my nervous system.
That's awesome. I love that. Yes, Linda Tye's course is available just for anyone really to take. I have heard, just as a disclaimer to everyone listening, it is a bit heady. There's a lot of science behind it, right? So, if you decide to take it, I know it would be valuable, even if you get a little bit lost on some of the things. I'm working on Susan McConnell's book, Somatic IFS Therapy, right now. So bringing the body even into parts work is super important. So that's my goals for 2023. So yay, and breath work is amazing.
Yeah, and Linda Tide does a really good job at scaffolding your learning, right? So she builds on every week, builds on it, and yes, it can feel really overwhelming at the beginning, but she explains it so well and builds on it, and yeah, so I felt like it was really beneficial.
Yeah, great
I
plug.
learned so
I
much from
love
that
that.
course.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love it. I'm gonna I can when I put your resources in the links below, I will find the link to her actual site to sign up for that course. And then I will I'll add in the breath work also, but that'll all be in the show notes, as will all of your contact info. But please tell people if they'd like to reach out to you or learn more about Aim True Coaching, how can they find you and where should they reach out to?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter, so at aimtrue7.
Yep.
My website is www.aimtruecoaching.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. I'll have those linked up for you. Amy, is there anything that I should have asked that didn't, or anything that you want to share as we close out our time together?
I think the biggest thing is that, some people look at healing as, oh, it's a final destination. my philosophy is that it really isn't, right? It's continuous. And I anticipate that in a year from now, I'm going to be, in such a better place than I am now, because it's just continuous journey, right? And it's spiral. And sometimes we have to go back and revisit things, and that's okay. But there's just never really an ending. And we just keep going and we keep becoming better.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Amy. I appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing with us. We'll have everything linked up in the show notes to get in touch with her. And we will see you next time on the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening or watching this episode of Trauma Survivorhood. For more info, show notes, and links, check out the episode guide below. Until next time, be well, survivors.